Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the back row from What I Watched Tonight. My name is still Matt Hudson, and this is Retrospectives. It's my show to discuss a favourite movie with someone who shares that same opinion. And joining me in the back row tonight is pure and utter royalty. It's a Commonwealth friend of mine, and put simply, it's the Queen of Canada once again. It's Lora. How the hell are you?
Hey, Matt. I am so good. So good. Thank you for that great introduction. I love being called a queen.
That is what you are. What do you think of The Rise of Skywalker? Oh no, we'll take that off here.
Another time.
Yeah, we haven't spent 45 minutes talking about that. How's things in Canada? How's life?
Life is pretty all right. Things are getting back to normal, sort of. But I continue to stay home for the most part and not get sick. So I hope everyone else is doing well out in the world.
That's a double win right there as well. But then the images you post where you have been out, it's the beauty of like the Canadian vistas and landscape just makes me violently jealous. For those who haven't heard any of the shows that myself and Laura have done, if you haven't, go check them out. They'll be in the feed. We talk about soundtracks. We just talk film in one of them as well. I first became aware of Her Majesty on Twitter on Star Wars Twitter. Laura was active in the fandom, and that's where I met her. So, how are you now with the Star Wars fandom, and what are you thinking about that particular franchise before we move on?
Well, no hate, all love, but
I
took a little step away from the Star Wars fandom and deactivated my Star Wars Stan account, as we call it, a little while ago, and I haven't brought it back, so I'm just kind of cruising on my low follower personal Twitter, which right now, and I still kind of interact with Star Wars a little bit. I have lots of friends that I still talk to about Star Wars, but I'm just not as involved as I used to be.
She did it. She made the sacrifice. In terms of that, major as a deep cut. In terms of that, but no, well, as it would so turn out, we are talking about a film set in the stars tonight, and it's a film which Laura Wren chooses as one of her highlights of her life. Possibly. We're talking about Apollo 13 tonight. So before I get into what Laura thinks about it, let's do what we do on the retrospectives and do the admin. So, who's it directed by? A little man called Ron Howard. You have heard of him probably. It stars Tom Hanks as Jim Lovell, Kevin Bacon as Jack Swigert, Bill Paxton as Fred Hayes, Ed Harris as Gene Kranz, Gary Sinise as Ken Mattingly, and Kathleen Quinlan as Marilyn Lovell. It was released on June the 30th, 1995. It was made for $52 million, and it went on to make $355.2 million worldwide. In terms of Oscars, it was nominated for 9 of them. Nominated for Best Picture, Best Supporting Actor for Ed Harris, Best Supporting Actress for Kathleen Quinlan, Best Original Score, Best Art Direction, Best Visual Effects, and Best Adapted Screenplay. And it went on to win the Oscar for Best Film Editing and Best Sound. And what's it about? It's about the astronauts Jim Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hayes aboard Apollo 13 for America's third moon landing mission. En route, an onboard explosion deprives their spacecraft of most of its oxygen supply and electric power, forcing NASA's flight controllers to abort the moon landing and turn the mission into a struggle to get the 3 men home safely. So that's Apollo 13 in a nutshell. Before we talk about it, if you haven't seen Apollo 13, this is your spoiler warning. It's 2 hours, 20 minutes long. Go check it out, then come back and listen to myself and Laura shoot the spatial breeze about it. So one last time, spoilers. So now, enough from me. Laura, Apollo 13 then. Why is this film one of your top films?
Why? I asked myself that the other night when I was watching it, and I actually kind of froze for a minute because I couldn't think of a real reason this is why I like this movie. I couldn't remember when I first saw it why I was so attracted to it, but this is what I have deduced. I am a space buff. I'm fascinated by the idea of space travel and exploration. And when I saw this movie, for 1995, I have to say, I thought the effects were quite well done. Mm-hmm. And I am a sucker for the American feel good story. I just like,
As a Canadian.
yeah, as a Canadian, and since I live in a country that borders the United States, and I visited quite a bit. There's this sort of connection between the two of us. We're very similar in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
and we're very different in a lot of ways as well. But um, I really just admire and find it inspiring how people will come together to do whatever they can for their fellow, you can say citizens, I just say fellow human beings.
Mhm.
um, and I just think it's a really nice story. It's yeah, it was just inspiring to me, and every time I watch it I'm like, oh, that feels good. At the end of the movie I'm always like, it's such a nice, like, you know story, what people will hold on to, they'll pray for, they'll support others. What happened in this movie with the accident, people from around the world were rooting and praying for these three men to return home safely, and that to me is really exceptional. So I think, yeah, I'm just a sucker for that kind of stuff. So
So you like a happy ending. In fact, I think it's a fact. Also, it's a true story, but obviously, but it's still so riveting. Even though, if you don't know what happens in Apollo 13 for the first time you see the film, it's genuinely exciting. If you do know what happens, it's still genuinely bloody exciting and riveting as to what happens. And I get that though. I get that. Sometimes we all need a good, happy ending, or a story which kind of reiterates that humans aren't bad. Certainly not all of them. There is good out there still, and Apollo 13 is a bloody good example of that. You mentioned then, like what you were thinking, like the first time you saw it. Do you remember when you first saw this film? How long ago it was, or?
I saw it. So my mom was pretty open to taking me to see movies. If I wanted to see it, she would take it, or she'd go see the movie first just to make sure that I wouldn't be like scared or something like that, and
Mhm.
then she would take me to see it. So she did that with Jurassic Park. She went to see it first. Then she said, she can handle this. So then she let me go see the movie. Because when Jurassic Park came out, I was younger than I was, so I was 7 or
Mhm.
something like that. I was 10 when Apollo 13 came out in the theater. And I mean, I don't remember being 10 or like how I was or how I reacted to this movie. I just remember loving the movie. I really tried to think back as to like what it was, and like, I don't know. I've owned this movie for so long, and I've just always loved it. So I'm assuming it was the whole like space aspect. My fascination with rockets and like the engineering of how rockets are built, and the idea that we put people, and I say we loosely, like I just mean like human
Mhm.
beings, put people into space in these like basically like tin cans.
Yeah.
And we sent them to the moon, and then they walked on the moon. And there's obviously a lot of controversy that surrounds that whole thing. Some people don't believe that, and they think it's a hoax and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not one of those people. But we're all entitled to our opinions. But I thought it was just, I've always just been sort of fascinated by that. And so for this to happen, when the odds really seem to be packed against them to get home, like it's really incredible, the perseverance and the teamwork that they had to do for them to get figure out a way for them to get home safely. Yeah, and I've always wanted to go visit. I've always wanted to go visit like Cape
Mm.
Canaveral and the Houston mission control to like see what it looks like. 'Cause I'm pretty sure they still have it all up
Mhm.
still, like the old mission control, like the room or whatever. They have it there for like tours and stuff like that. And yeah, it's fascinating to me that you know all these like the computers and stuff, the advancements in technology, because the American government threw money at the space program back then because they were trying to beat the Russians to space. So they were just throwing money at it, and these incredibly talented and smart people, not just Americans, like people from all around the world, there was a lot of English folks too who worked for
Hmm.
NASA at that time and developed these programs. And if you've ever seen the movie Hidden
Yes.
Figures, you'll know that there's some people too that you don't see or hear about that were working behind the scenes, that some Black Americans and Black females who developed these incredible advanced computer systems, and it takes engineers and mathematicians and scientists to like come up with these incredible feats, technological feats, and it's just amazing to me. So uh, for them in 1969, well, even before that, to put people in space, A, to land people on the moon, B, but then to get them back home after part of their spacecraft has blown off by like it's just it's a really great story, and it has a happy ending. So
Yeah, thank God for that, or else this could have been a different story. It's Roger Ebert,
yeah,
one of the greatest film critics of all time. Roger Ebert, he said, Apollo 13 inspires many reflections, and one of them is that America's space program was achieved with equipment that would look like a tin can today, which is pretty much what you said.
yeah,
Like a bit of aluminium foil was keeping them from the vacuum of space and obviously atmospheric changes and the fire of the re-entry. It's incredible. It's
yeah,
incredible what humans can do when they come together and work towards something as like monumental as going to another planet. It's incredible. I think well, I mean, we're of the same age. I believe I saw this at the cinema as well because there's a certain film like films like this which came out when they're just like almost event films where you like because it's historical. Like, I need to see that, and I think I went to go and see it with
right,
my mum and dad, and I just remember, I don't think I was aware of the actual true story at the time. It was a true story, but I wasn't aware of what happened. So I was watching it as like a 10-year-old boy, like clenching every muscle possible, like, oh, what's going on here? And then, yeah, by the end of it, it's like that massive sigh of relief at the end when, everything's going to be all right. Everybody comes together. It's not just one person, it's everybody comes together. Even the doubters, they all work together to get them home. So, well, let's talk about the film
yeah.
itself then. So, let's dive in then with some of your favourite moments. What are some of the things that stand out that you love about this film?
Um, so first I wanted, because you mentioned how it was a true story. So from what I recall, does it actually say at the beginning of the movie if it's based on true events
I
or
don't
not?
think it does. No.
I don't think it does, because Ron Howard had joked. So I was reading some stuff up yesterday, before I get into what I love about it, but that when they were first screening the movie, he got one like review back about how had this disdain for this, because this viewer, because he didn't think that could ever happen. They would never make it home alive. He's like, clearly he didn't realize that this was in fact a true
He
story.
didn't know it
So
was a true
it
story.
is a true story, guys. It did happen. They got back alive.
Jim Lovell's
So
real.
one of the things that really stood out for me, and I realized that I have this weird affinity for movies that are based in like in the early 1900s, between like early and mid
Mm-hmm.
century America. And I don't know what it is. I can't really like pinpoint what it is, but I really loved the set design of this
Mm,
movie. I know that this was something that was really important to Ron Howard, to make sure that the accuracy of the film was portrayed well on screen, that the astronauts that were going to be watching this film were happy with what they saw and what they heard. But just the basic set design, like how at the beginning of the movie they have like a party at
yeah.
the house, and the costumes, how the house was set up, the car that Jim Lovell drove, which is like a red Corvette. So the real Jim Lovell drove a silver Corvette. And I actually was watching an Apollo documentary, and they showed him. There was like someone was filming somewhere, and they showed him showing up in his car, and I'm like, hey, that's like the exact car. Just like these little things that kind of offer to the
Mm-hmm.
authenticity of the movie. I really appreciate that kind of stuff. Um, the cinematography was, I think, for the time, really well done. the special effects. You know, and I just really think it was cast really well. And when we go on, I could talk about like scenes that I liked, but these are just the few things that I really appreciated about the movie. I always feel like kind of entrenched, like I'm living in this time and I'm watching all this happen right now. It felt like it was being truly being filmed in 1969, you know. So I just really think they did such a good job. You know, they're all the people in the mission control. They're all like smoking and stuff like that, and you just think how gross it must be in there with all like the cigarettes and stuff. And I'm like, but that's like how it was, right? Like that's how it is. And yeah, this is probably one of my favorite Ed Harris films. With him, I really loved his performance in this one. You know, obviously that speaks a lot about the real people and what kind of people they must have been. I've seen interviews with all of the real people, and Gene Kranz, who is played by Ed Harris. I could see why they cast Ed Harris as him, and he's very, you know, what's
intense.
The word? I wouldn't say. Yeah, he's like a little intense. He seems smart and he's serious, but he's not like too serious that he can't like joke around, you know. But you could tell he's the guy that gets the job done, and I think just Ed Harris did such a good job. I love the whole vest thing. How for every mission, his wife makes him a new vest, and you know everyone just like waiting to see like what it looks like, and I really loved that they added that kind of stuff in there.
The mission couldn't start until everyone had seen what Mrs. Krantz had made for him. It was quite a smart little white waistcoat, actually. I quite enjoyed that. I think production design and costume design and set design is an underrated aspect of filmmaking, I think, because like you just said, if you don't believe this film is set in 69, 70, then you've lost before you've even started. And they really did nail that aesthetic, even though you're seeing Tom Hanks, Gary Sinise, Bacon himself. Even though you're seeing faces that you're familiar with, you still need to believe that these people are the characters they're playing in this environment they're set. And you do. I do. And they had a guy called Dave Scott as an astronaut. He was on set as the chief technological consultant. So they had actual NASA astronauts on set to make sure that what was being said and how even maneuvers and movements and instructions were being given and portrayed were as accurate as possible. And Ed Harris and the mission control dudes, they all went on flight controller classes again, so they could pick up the lingo, so they had an understanding of what it was they were telling the cast in space. So they had that authenticity. So they really went all in. Ron Howard and all of the cast and the team there. So I think that's a great point to kick us off with. That, you know, without being able to buy into the fact that it was set when it was, then the film fails. And also, the space scenes when they're on the Apollo or the lunar modules, I believe that they're in space. You know what I mean? I don't believe that they're on a soundstage or they're on a KC-135 hurtling through the sky so they can get the weightlessness. I believe they're in space, and I think as a start of a 10, that's a fantastic way to kick us off.
Yeah, and before we move on, I think we'd be remiss not to mention that this movie is also based off the book by astronaut Jim Lovell called Lost Moon: The Perilous Voyage of Apollo 13. So it's in the writing credits that this movie is based off of this book.
Yeah, that's a good show.
I am ashamed to say that I have not read his book. I've never read this book, but it's always like something I'm like, oh, I have to read this book. And I've never gotten around to it. But so I just wanted to mention that so people know that, you know, I'm just some of the scenes and things that he discusses in his book are shown in the movie.
Yeah, it's a good shout. And obviously Jim Lovell is the focal point of the film. And you mentioned cinematography. Dean Cundy is the cinematography for this film, and he's been on. He did Alien, a lot of Halloween. Sorry, not Alien, Halloween. Sorry, a lot of the Halloween films. He did Back to the Future, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Jurassic Park. He was in the film, but he did things like Hook, The Parent Trap. He also did stuff like Flubber as well. So, you know, and Halloween 3. You know, take the shite with the good there. But the Dean Cundy, very good cinematographer, so shout out to him. But all right then, old Ren, what we thinking then? So scenes or moments? What was floating your spaceship?
I know a lot of people don't. I know a lot of people who don't really like the stuff leading up to the action part, but I do enjoy kind of seeing all that stuff that happens before the climax
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like I learn a lot. So just from the start of the movie, like I like, look, okay, I'll say I like all of the movie, but I really do like all the stuff beforehand. So when at the beginning of the film, when they're all meeting at the Lovell's house for the moon landing,
Yeah.
and they all get together and to experience that together and what that must have been like for people in 19 uh
69
what
it
was
was.
it, 1969,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, sorry, I got the dates mixed up. 1970 was Apollo 13, 1969 we landed on the moon.
Everybody
Okay,
gets
so
one.
yeah, what that was like for people then and how like proud and not just for Americans but for the world to
Mm-hmm.
like see humans on the moon. And I really like how they did that scene. And they used the real footage from Walter Cronkite uh, talking about that. And I really loved some of the authentic stuff that Ron Howard threw in that movie because he didn't have to use like made up footage. He was able to um, use real footage from that time and put it in to give it that authenticity. So yeah, I really like that. Um, I don't know that there's so much.
That's the problem.
I really love all the mission control stuff. Like I said earlier, I've been forever wanting to visit mission control to see um, how it looks. I heard that in real life, the room is actually much smaller
Mm-hmm.
than what it is in the film. But they had to so they built almost an exact replica of what it looked like in 1970, and but they had to build it bigger so they could film in there. One thing that you don't see that I'm just going to mention before I forget that is in that mission control room, there's a room beside it, and there's like a big glass wall, so you can actually see all these other people in there. And those are actually the people who are like the problem solvers, the ones
Nice.
that do all the like, work and figure all the hard stuff out. And there's one shot in the film, there might have been more, but I noticed one shot you can kind of see the window. They have like a little bit of you can see it, but they don't actually show it or talk about it in the film. But that's actually like where most of the stuff happened. Um, the scene where the rocket takes off,
Oh yeah.
love that. So well done. Just really cool. Like so well done for 1995 to where I was like literally felt like I was watching a rocket take off. Thought that was really cool. I kind of on the last little bit. I'm not obsessed, but like I really am interested in the design and uh, mechanics of the engines of these rockets, and uh, so that was really cool. And the design of the Saturn V rocket, just it's just incredible. So the takeoff, the scene when they get into space and they show you how the spacecraft comes apart and everything that happens when they get into space. They did really well with that. Um, and then yeah, the scenes in the spacecraft. I felt like I'm in space with these guys.
Mm-hmm.
It was just so well done. Like, yes, they had the zero gravity, but most of the time they were just. It was actually just this like seesaw thing that they were on, right? And they just portrayed it so well. It just says a lot to their acting, and yeah. So I really, I felt like even though they don't talk a lot about this stuff, you kind of learn a little bit about what spacecraft looks like, what it can do. Um, Someone told me that the computer on board those spacecrafts at the time was as fast as a Nintendo Game Boy of
Wow.
like the 90s or whenever the
Wow.
Nintendo Game Boy came out. So that's how advanced they were during that time. Like
Mm-hmm.
2 decades before we even had Game Boys, they already had computers that were like that fast. Um,
I'm sure they
yeah,
weren't playing Tetris up there.
yeah.
It'd be fun if they were.
Um, and I did really enjoy the scenes. Basically anything with Ed Harris in it, I was like down for. The stuff that they had on the side where they were talking about how they were going to bring them home, those meetings in the rooms and stuff. I really like the dialogue there, and um, yeah, those are things off the top of my head that I really enjoyed. And I was just thinking how much I miss Bill Paxton. Such
Yeah.
a good, such a good actor, such a good guy.
Yeah, because people remember him for the "It's game over, man" line in Aliens, but you forget he actually is a massive part of Apollo 13. And
Yeah,
you mentioned the cast: Bacon, Hanks, and Paxton, and Gary Sinise as well,
Gary
and
Sinise.
all of them. Ed Harris, Kathleen Quinlan, again, best supporting actress for playing Jim Lovell's suffering wife in this film.
Yeah,
Everybody
and she
comes
did a
together.
really good job too,
Yeah, she
because
did
she
a
was
great job.
alone most of the movie, right?
Hmm.
She was, had to do a lot of scenes by herself, and I can imagine as an actor that's really hard because she's kind of crying or she's like upset for most of the movie, and so yeah, it's just really well done. And it's the only Oscar nomination she's ever received was for that movie.
Yeah, and
And then
well,
the kids are actually like little the guy who plays Jim Lovell's little son. I think Miko or Miko. I can't remember his last name, but he was so cute. And then his daughter.
when he's asking about the mission at the beginning, and Space Dad Tom Hanks is telling him, this is what could go, this is what went wrong on that ship, but we're not going to do it on our ship. It's like Tom Hanks could be everyone's father.
Yeah, yeah. And then his daughter, his like oldest daughter, freaking out because the Beatles broke up.
Yeah, it was a great scene. I like when Jim finds out that his crew have been moved up to Apollo 13 because the current crew have had to move aside. Jim comes in and he's like, we're going to have to change our holiday destination to the moon. And it's at the same time when I think it's Halloween at the time or something like that. They're going to some sort of Halloween party. And Jim's daughter is wearing this outfit. And Marilyn said to her, "You're not wearing that." And Jim sees it and he's like, "Yep, you can wear that." And he gets the look from his wife and he's like, "No, you're not going out in that." I was like, man knows his place. He might be going on the moon, but he knows who wears the trousers in that relationship. About your first point, the house party, I've got that down as well because I really like that. Just a nice scene because we actually start with the Apollo 1 Inferno, which is 18 months before the
Yeah,
scenes in the moonwalk, which was quite a big thing to start with, just like death, basically, just like tragic
right.
Inferno death. But then we got the house party scene because obviously then you have that complete juxtaposition between that first scene and this, and it is the set design, the costume design. It's Kevin Bacon flirting awfully with Tracy, one of his girlfriends in the film, about how to dock and all that kind of stuff. And
Yeah,
everyone getting around to watch it, and then Jim and Marilyn afterwards when they're outside looking at the moon, and Jim Lovell's putting his thumb up to the moon and like closing one eye so he can't see it. I think that's a great way to set the scene. In terms of the lift off, like the actual lift off, again, yeah, like you say, 1995, I think they did that really well from Cape Kennedy. From the moment they're going up in the elevator, and of course you have to get the congratulatory USA letters very slowly going past them, just so you know who's shooting this, which country's doing that. But they do a great job of showing the scale of the rocket. The score from James Horner is excellent throughout, but in this moment it's great. Obviously the countdown, T minus blah blah, and then Ken. I know I'm going to mention what happens to Ken Mattingly shortly, but Ken turns up to watch and he's supporting it, and it's
it's an awesome car.
from that. The cars are so good in this time, and the
I learned that apparently during those times astronauts got like 2 free cars a year
yes.
from dealerships or something like that, which I just read yesterday, and I was like, wow, no wonder.
I fancy being an astronaut just so I don't have to pay for my car. I mean, yeah, obviously space is perilous, but 2 free cars, sweet.
Yeah,
But the bit where they, like you say, when they get into space and they detach, and engine 5 starts flashing, and Jim Lovell's just like, looks like we've just had our glitch for the mission. I'm thinking, you
right.
dick, Jim. Don't say that, because now we know what's coming, obviously. But and the bit before that, when Marilyn's in the shower and her ring falls down, I found out that actually happened. Not quite
It did.
as it played out, but that scene was real, because a lot of people were like, come on, that's a bit saturating, a bit melodramatic. But apparently Marilyn's wedding ring did fall down in the shower, but the plug managed to catch it and she retrieved it. Whereas in this film, obviously, it goes down the pipe and it's meant to, and obviously there's the whole bad luck symbolism behind all of that. But I enjoyed that. And obviously everything else you mentioned as well, I've got points on. But for those sort of kind of major moments, like the start of the film and then when they actually get into space, very well done.
Yeah. So you mentioned that a little bit of trivia there about the ring. So yeah, she did lose it, and then she said it was later she found it. But I also want to mention that line that he says about going to Acapulco or whatever.
Yeah.
So he did say that to her, but for a different mission, for the Apollo 8 mission that he was on.
Gotcha.
So he said, maybe we could go to the moon instead or something like that. So that was an authentic line. It was just used in a different part, just to, yeah. So there's actually a lot of that, and I kind of wrote down some stuff that because I know people, obviously, when we watch movies that are based on true stories, we wonder how much of it is authentic and how much of it is dramatized. So I'm hoping we could talk a little bit about that. I think for the most part, of course, there's going to be adage into this movie to make it more dramatic, and it is a movie. But I think Ron Howard did a really good job in trying to be as accurate as he could, even if he took some of the things that did happen and then just like changed it a little bit.
Yeah.
Just for that sort of dramatic feel. But yeah, so we could talk about a little bit of trivia.
Yeah, man. They would
for all things, like, I can't say there's anything and I'm going to be that person. There's nothing about this movie that I don't like. I felt like I learned a lot. It piqued my interest. It got me inspired. Yeah, there wasn't anything in this movie that I was like, nah, no. Not even the ring thing bothered me because I don't know. Even though I didn't know at the time that it actually had happened, she had a dream too. We see that sort of play out. That was kind of crazy. I do remember watching that thinking, oh my God, is this happening? What's going on?
Yeah, I hate space scares the shit out of me anyway. And then to see that, I was like, stuff that. I was thinking about going to space next week, but now, no thanks. It's just, it's a malfunction, isn't it? And then Jim Lovell's holding on to the door as he's getting sucked into space, and then something up hits him, and you just see him floating off into space. And I got nauseous again watching that, because it's the idea of being knocked into infinity. Do you know what I mean? Once you're out there, that's it. You're gone forever. And it's just you in that suit forever. And it's just, oh God, this space is equally stunning. It's beautiful, but it's terrifying. It's terrifying.
Well, it's vast emptiness is what it is. And it's dark. And there's no, like, it's not like what you see in these fantasy sci-fi movies where people can get, like, picked up or whatever. Like, if you're floating in space, like, you can get picked up, obviously, but like, it's not as easy as some of the movies make it seem like, right? So it's
you
terrifying.
Can't just lock onto someone in space. It's not like going to, downtown Calgary or somewhere, or Vancouver. I'm just going to stand in the city and hopefully I see someone. This is like, this is space. You can't just bounce off the edge and come back again. Once you're out there,
exactly.
You're out there.
You get, like, hard and you bounce off into space, you're going to keep going. It just doesn't really, there's no controlling that.
I can feel my hands getting sweaty thinking about that.
Yeah. Oh. So Marilyn Lovell, Jim Lovell's wife, said she had the dream because Jim had taken her to see the movie Maroon. 1969. It came out in November 1969, and it was about some astronauts or something that were stranded in space.
Yep.
So, not really the best movie to take.
Not really a date movie when you're going into space.
He didn't know at that time. Oh no, wait, maybe he did know. I think it was around the time he did know that he had gotten that assignment. But not the best movie to watch. So that it gave her a nightmare.
Like going to a theme park and watching something like Final Destination or something like that, or going on a plane and watching that. It's like, let's watch this the night before. No, I don't fancy going on holiday. Yeah, Marooned is a decent film, actually. It's Gene Hackman and Gregory Peck. It's not the best thing film to watch before going on a space mission. So Mr. Lovell's got a few things to work on there with his courting skills,
Yeah.
but then again, he'd already married. He probably thought I can get away with this. But in between the party and going into space, I mentioned Ken Mattingly, played very, very, very well by Gary Sinise. So I still think he's an underappreciated actor. I think Gary Sinise is excellent whenever he appears. And I like the moment when you find out that he's been exposed to German measles and he can't go to space. And obviously Jim Lovell's then got to tell him that he's not coming. And in the meantime, Jack Swigert, the playboy, he's going to take his place 2 days before the mission. And we find out that Jack's getting it in a motel room with another woman, not the one he was with at the beginning of the film. So they show that side. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he's just like this, like overexcited, almost like they really play him out to kind of be naive, even though they say like he's a very, very good pilot. And in real life, he was actually an excellent pilot. Exactly.
Like Jim Lovell spoke about how like intelligent he actually is. Like he's very, very smart. Plus, you know what, guys, like you don't become an astronaut for being you have to be like close to like genius level smart. You got to know. You got to be very.
There's
smart.
a reason why I'm on Earth. I'm not up there.
He's a little bit of a player. I think they try to portray him. They call them like the Bachelor or whatever, right? Because back in the day, if you're his age and you're not married, and you're kind of known to like date around or be a ladies' man, then they'll talk about you.
Yeah, they mentioned that,
like that.
When Fred Hayes was feeling ill later on in the film. They're like, I think Jack gave me the clap. And him and Jim have a little giggle about it. And then I had a giggle about that as well. But I like the fact that they had that moment, because throughout the whole build-up, you've got Ken Mattingly is training for the lunar mission, so he wants to get his rate of turn correct. He spends like 3 hours at a time in the simulator with the guys, just so they can get every little bit right. So they show him meticulously going into it. And then Jim Lovell gets called into like the boss's office, and they're like, mate, if you don't kick Mattingly off, you aren't going into space. In fact, none of you are going into space. And it turns out, that Ken never had measles in the first place. He was just exposed to it. So there's that bit which gets full circle. So it's kind of very tragic, but in a way it isn't, because obviously nobody knew what was going to happen with the Apollo 13 mission. So for Ken Mattingly, he's been taken away from the chance of a lifetime. Because remember, Apollo 11 landed on the moon. Apollo 12 landed on the moon. The odds were that, they've nailed it. Apollo 13, we're going to get on the moon, and Ken's going to walk on the moon. So it's almost like a once-in-a-lifetime moment taken away from him for nothing, because he hasn't got the damn measles, as he says. Turns out that for him, it could have saved his life, even though they all got back. But he still ended up playing a major part in their return. So I love that kind of almost like arc, because you could tell that he wasn't happy. The fact that it had been pulled away from him, he wasn't happy about it, because he knew he wasn't ill. But he was at the launch, like we said, and he was supporting them. And through the whole time, even through his quote unquote bitterness in the beer cans, he was still with the guys. He's still with them. And at the end, he's like, I never. And Jim Lovell at the end, when he's explaining what happened to all of the astronauts after the mission, and he's like, he even says then, Ken Mattingly, he never had the measles, having never had the measles. So I just wanted to shout out to Gary Sinise's character and his little arc he went through the film, because obviously he was in the film portrayed as instrumental as being in that simulator, replicating the environment that the guys in space had to try and get them home. And I love how they played off the tension of how they had to bring the amps down to below 12 so they could get them home and get enough power to boost them. And I think Gary Sinise did a very good job in this, and I think he's an underrated actor. But yeah, Ken Mattingly and his arc, which then obviously leads into Jack Swigert, but I think he had a great arc.
So I 100% agree with you, but I'm just going to throw in some trivia here. Because I did read some stuff about Ken Mattingly and how it explained his role in the Apollo 13 rescue and what it actually looked like compared to what was portrayed in the movie. But just to make a note that Gary Sinise had just come off Forrest Gump. Yeah. And that was like kind of his like breakthrough, like, and if you've seen that movie, he's awesome in that movie. Like, you just feel for the guy. You're just like, oh man, this guy. But so he said that he wasn't assigned any specific role to play in the movie, or to play in the rescue of these men. He wasn't a part of any one or two projects. He was more or less a part of teams of um, getting ideas out there and problem solving on how to bring them home. He said that there was actually a couple of other astronauts that were actually in the simulators doing different things, kind of how you see it in the movie. He didn't say anything about amps, but he did talk about going through the procedures, like one by one, how they read them out to them, and then they would go and turn things on, and they would say, okay, like we need to do this so that Jack can do it, and we need it so that he can do it, and it's easy, like, because there's a lot going on up there right now. So he wasn't, and I'm not sure because I couldn't find anything as to why they chose Mattingly, and I think it is probably just because he was supposed to be on that mission that they used him instead of
because he trained so hard before. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So for a cinematic point of view, it was a really good call because that whole role and the way Gary Sinise played just worked out really well, even if that's not quite how it went. But he was a part of it. Like he just maybe wasn't a part of it in the way that we see it in the movie, and that there was actually other people, other astronauts who played a role in doing that too that we didn't hear about. So shout out to them. I don't know their names, and he couldn't quite remember. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, you're right. And they have to have that cinematic. They have to have that drama, even if they have to change things up a little bit. They never. Maybe that's why they didn't put based on a true story, or because firstly people know that, but also they have taken a few liberties. Nothing major, but it's little things like that. But it's just for dramatic reconstruction. It's a Hollywood film in the end of the day, and the whole point is if you just made a film based on exactly what happened, it may not be quite as quote unquote exciting. Just like the TV studios at the time, they didn't even bother showing the broadcast from Apollo 13 in space because they said it wasn't exciting enough. Turns out that when obviously everything went, when it all hit the fan, they were suddenly showing up on the Lovell's doorstep and Marilyn was telling them where to stick it, which I like that as well. But yeah, they need that dramatic effect as well. It's just a film, isn't it?
Yeah. But like I said earlier, though, a lot of the stuff was authentic and did happen. It was just maybe changed a little bit to make it more dramatic. It's not like they added a lot of stuff in that never happened. Because a lot of movies do that. Things are based on true stories. Like the story itself is true, but then like all the things sort of leading up or the things during this, a lot of movies sort of just add stuff in that never actually did happen. So there are a few of those things in this movie. But for the most part, I think it was like 90% legit. One of the things that I really like that I noticed when watching some of the Apollo 13 documentaries, and there's quite a few of those out there for anyone who has Amazon, I guess Prime Video or whatever. So the movie is on Prime, but then there's also like 2 or 3 or 4 documentaries about like Apollo 13 and also just like the Apollo missions. There's one National Geographic one that I haven't watched yet. I'm kind of like obsessed with the whole Apollo program, but that they have a lot of, obviously they have all of the recording of the original like mission transcript, like everything that was said between mission control and the astronauts when they were in space. And Ron Howard did an amazing job in taking a lot of that stuff and just putting it into the movie, like making it the actual lines of the actors. So when I was watching these documentaries, I was like, oh my God, they actually said that. Oh, he said that. And, oh, he said that too. So I thought that was really cool that he did that. I'm like, I kind of felt like, I'm like, oh, did he really have to write much of a script? He basically took it all from what they actually said, but it makes it more legitimate and more believable that way, I think. And since I'm on script and stuff, I think maybe we should talk about that famous line that is like famously known around the world that people say every once in a while, which is the line from the movie is, "Houston, we have a problem." And the actual line that was said by Jim Lovell. Both Lovell and Swagger, I think, said the same thing. Was Houston, we've had a problem here. So
Yeah.
that was the original line. And then Ron Howard took that, and I think at the suggestion of Tom Hanks is what I read, that it should be changed to Houston, we have a problem, to make it more, to make it sound like it's present tense, which I find kind of weird too, because I'm like, why were these guys saying these lines like the problem was in the past when it's actually like ongoing right now? It's like happening in real time, you know?
It could have been comedic as well, and I don't mean that to sound disingenuous, but if we'd seen the shot of the oxygen tank bursting, all the systems failing, everybody panicking in Houston, the crew talking over each other trying to work out what's going on, Jim Lovell seeing that this oxygen's being vented into space, and then he goes on the radio and is like, Houston, we've had a problem. It could have been like, no shit.
Yeah,
So obviously, changing it like that, I think, again, dramatic purposes. But in terms of what's actually going on, what we can see, I think obviously it's one of the most famous lines in film history now. Houston, we have a problem, and they're like the tightly shot frame on Tom Hanks' face, Jim Lovell's face. But yeah, had they said it in a different tense, it would have felt a bit odd.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So the line has become really famous, and to me, that's just like a subtle change. It's not even like they never said it, like, because they actually said it. You know, it just sounded, it was in different tense, and so I think that's really cool. Like, the actual astronauts, not movie writers, use the words, and they may have not said it as like dramatic and whatever, but yeah, they just took it and changed it around a little bit for that dramatic effect, but it has become one of the most famous lines, in cinematic history.
It's like
kind of cool.
It's like the Darth Vader line. How many people say, "Luke, I am your father"? You know, you have, people change things around to what they remember. But for that, you know, like you say, they still said it. They just tweaked well. And if you didn't know that Jim Lovell said something slightly different, like a labial fricative different, it's not going to change. I'm not like, now I know that from looking into the film. I don't look at that scene now and think, well, that's bloody awful. Now that's taken all the effect out because he said a different word.
Right.
Nope. You know, I mean, it doesn't change a thing for people who don't know about it, and it's that the word I hate, but it's iconic. It's a legendary scene in film, and everything that goes around it as well. Like the scene after when Houston asks him to close the react valves, but it means no moon landing, and if it doesn't work, we're not going to have enough power left to get home. And Tom Hanks is a great actor. We all know that, but it's just how he emotes on his face a lot in this film. When there's a scene I want to mention later on, which he does as well, but the realization that I'm not going to the moon, this is it, because he's already announced in a photo shoot beforehand he's going to retire, which I thought was a great scene.
That was a good one.
When he realizes he's not getting to the moon, it's kind of like, also because it's Tom Hanks, you're just like, oh man, it hits home even more. But yeah, that's a great moment in the film, and good little bit of knowledge there that it was all changed over, like the line was changed. Sorry.
Yeah, and I'm sure you can find it somewhere where you can actually listen to the original, them saying it. And there's are differences between, because these are astronauts, they're trained not to like overreact or like panic and whatever. So the differences that you will see that I noted is, you know, a difference between a movie and real life, is that they were quite calm on the radio. There wasn't a lot of panic, and it was just like, this is what's happening, like we need to figure out what's going on here. And in the movie it's more or less like they're frantic, and you know, things are crazy, and we also don't know, you know, exactly if it was like that. Like, again, maybe Jim Lovell talks about it in his book, but we don't know if what happened in the movie, as far as like all the lights flickering and the things moving around and stuff, if that's exactly what was going on. But yeah, it just translates really well on screen, and how Ron Howard decided to direct that, like that whole sequence of right after the explosion.
And that's 15 minutes into the film as well. So we've had 50 minutes of character development, of build up, of knowledge, because like you say, we're getting we're getting fed knowledge about space missions and lunar missions, but intelligently. They're not spelling it out for us like certain films will do. You learn as you go along. So we have 50 minutes of it of triumph almost. It's like this is going to happen. We're going to the moon. I'm going to retire after this. Everyone to the fact that where Marilyn's like, I'm not even going to come to the launch. The kids need me. She's so used to it, and that's kind of what we're lulled into. They're going to go into space, and it's going to be simple. And then that happens 50 minutes in, and after that, it all goes to pot. But before we mention that, we mentioned Jack Swigert. Thought I'd just mention him and Kevin Bacon because you mentioned the other guys as well. I like Jack's arc in this because, like we say, when we first meet him, he's talking about penetration to Tracy. Great introduction. And then the first test with Jack Swigert 2 days before is a massive disaster. They'd all die if that was in real life. Then when they're in space and he's having to dock with the other ship, they play it really tense and they've got like a really slow countdown. And the whole time, Fred and Jim are side-eyeing him like, is this guy going to be able to do it? Despite the fact that Jim knows he's a great pilot, there's always this uncertainty about Jack as a whole. And then later on in the film, after Fred says, I think Jack's giving me the clap, Jack comes down and he and Fred have an argument because Fred's basically saying, this whole thing's your fault. What did you do to the oxygen tank? And he's like, I did what I was damn well told. I restirred the oxygen and this happened. And I almost come to blows. And then by the end, they have the respect that they all got through it. And there's a lovely scene where Fred basically says, great, nice job, Jack, when they're trying to make their calculations home and they get the handshake at the end from Jim Lovell. So I think Jack gets an interesting arc in this film as well from going as kind of like the wild child, playboy, bad boy to being a respected member of the team. So I just wanted to shout out to Kevin Bacon and Jack as well.
Yeah. And Kevin Bacon's great. I've always just liked, I never loved or disliked him. I've always just thought he was just he's good, and anything he's in, I'm kind of just down for. And I'm happy he was given this role in this movie. I think he did so well. And you're right, that scene when we first meet him in the movie, he's talking to the girl. He has a glass and a beer bottle, and he's talking about how to dock the lunar module with the thing, and but really it's like he's talking about penetrate. It's just hilarious.
I didn't know if 10-year-old me understood what he's on about completely at the time. Yeah. Probably did, I'm not sure.
And then Jim Lovell introduces himself to like this girl that Jack's with, and he's like, hi.
That's it. Yeah. Jack's so proud, isn't he, for that like one evening, and then he's moved on to somebody else days later.
So not to like put a damper on things that you love about the sort of relationship that he plays with Bill Paxton's character, but I read, so Jim Lovell said that there's no arguing in space. There's no heated exchanges or anything like that. Mm-hmm. He's like, it would never happen. It just doesn't. You can't and this is sort of speaks like this to me. Like when I found out that when I heard the actual mission transfer, the voice communication between the astronauts and mission control, and then learning that they don't fight stuff. I'm like, they're really highly trained to behave a certain way, and so a lot of the dramatic stuff that you see between the astronauts in the movie is just movie stuff. I mean, some of the conversations might have happened, but it didn't go as heated as is portrayed to us in the film. But it adds for effect, and it spins off really well. And maybe in another environment, that's actually what would have happened between them. On Earth, and something was happening when they were training, maybe that's how it would have gone down. But as far as being in space, it's the whole losing of patience or yelling or anything. There's none of that going on. So I do also really like that they gave that arc to him, and it kind of makes me wonder about him as a guy in real life. Like at the end of the movie, we hear that he was voted into Congress in Colorado, but then he died from I think it was a brain tumor or something before he
cancer. I think.
something cancer, yeah. Which is kind of pretty sad, but so he goes from bachelor swagger guy to serious astronaut that has been through something really crazy, comes out the other end of that to congressman before he passes away. So
it's not a bad life, is it? I mean, in terms of a story to tell, it's certainly not bad. None of them went back into. I mean, Mattingly did, but he wasn't part of the crew. So Ken Mattingly was the only one who went back into space. So, yeah, I'd heard that the confrontations didn't happen. You've got to be a special type of character, I think, to stay calm in a situation where you're in space and your ship's falling apart around you. And just, I don't know, you have to have that utter Zen-like discipline, like a Jedi, like patience, discipline about you to not just stop beating the hell out of everyone up there, because I'm not sure how I do. But there's one of the scenes I wanted to mention was after everything's happened now. So we've had the blowout, we've had the realization they're not going to the moon, and we've had the power was shut off, and the astronauts are kind of silently trying to deal with the fact that this may not end very well at all. But it's when they actually have to slingshot around the moon, and this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful scene of Jim Lovell. He's looking out the window. You see Armstrong's tracks and Mount Marilyn, as he's called it, like the mountain he's dedicated to his wife.
Yeah.
And then they pass into the shadow, and it's Jim Lovell dreaming of his own moon landing. I love that scene, like him just fantasizing about what could have been, and at the end when Fred and Jack are looking out the window, just in awe, and Jim's just like, "Do you know what, guys? If you're done, I just want to go home now. I just want to get this done with." I love that scene. So obviously the slingshot in the what could have been the dream, and then the end when it just hits him, and he's like, "I just want to get out of here now." I think that was a great, great scene.
Yeah, and that actually happened.
Mm-hmm,
so yep. I read that he was asking them what their intentions were, because he had already seen it, and he was pretty desperate to get home, and he's like, so while he was like thinking of preparing the computers and wanting to get things done, they were looking out the windows and taking pictures and stuff, and so he said something along the lines of what is said in the movie. But yeah, that scene of him daydreaming about being on the moon is really beautiful. The music is really nice. And James Horner did a really nice job. The horn was pretty prominent in this film, and
yep,
the horn represents like victory, but also sadness and like military kind of things. That's used a lot in military and stuff. So we can talk about the music later, but I really liked that scene. And yeah, absolutely, like, gentlemen, what are your intentions? It's just, I love that.
It's Hank, isn't it? It's just the gravity that, no pun intended, the gravity and gravitas that Tom Hanks brings to that character was just excellent. And later on, there's a shot of Jim Lovell looking at the Earth, and it's juxtaposed with Marilyn looking up to the sky.
Beautiful.
Brilliant. Great moment. Little things like that where you may not remember it, even going back to watch the film. But when I watched it the other night for this show, I was like, that's a great shot. People can say it's cheesy or corny, but that's a great shot. And it comes after that incredibly arse-clenchingly tense scene where they have to course correct for entry, where they've got to keep the Earth in that triangular in the window, and you've got Fred Hayes who's on his last legs, about to die, pass out. He's having to control one stick. You got Jim Lovell on the other one, trying to keep the Earth in the window. I thought that was fantastic, because obviously the stakes are, if they course correct too much, they're going to incinerate upon re-entry. If they don't course correct enough, they're going to bounce, which just sounds terrifying. They're going to bounce off the atmosphere and into space, which just sounds terrifying. And it's great. Obviously, you've got Fred's bouncing around everywhere, and they shut down just in time. I don't know how accurate it was, but in the film, that is such a tense moment when they have to get it right, and they just about do it.
Yeah, it's amazing. And Jim Lovell, the real Jim Lovell, actually said that they had done a couple more burns that they didn't show in the movie. So if you think that part was intense, imagine having to do like 2 or 3 more of them
No thanks.
that like we didn't see is wild, right? But there's a lot of preciseness, and so like when you're really thinking about it, like you think just like we just think that watching that one thing is like super intense and they just have to get through that, but like everything they do in space uh is oh my gosh, how do we say is
It's
like
life or death almost.
done via through like mathematics and
Hmm.
science, and you have to be very precise and correct every time, otherwise all and like bad thing can happen, right? So every moment is you're relying, as those astronauts are relying on other people. So what we did end up seeing was they were waiting for a plan, right? So it was as they were having meetings down in Houston about how to like get these guys home. It was taking a really long time, and I'm not sure if this even happened, but what we see in the film is that they're trying to get up this plan to get them home, but then they didn't get this plan up to them until like they were waiting and waiting and waiting for it in the movie. And then there's this thing between Jack and Fred, who they're like, well, they don't have a plan and all this stuff, and then we find out that Ken is in the simulator helping, trying to find ways to get them
They're trying to
home and
save
stuff. So
4 watts, aren't
is
they?
that sort of like in like do they not have a plan? Like are they just gonna let us die out here? Like what's going on kind of thing. So um there was that too. That was kind of just that
Hmm.
waiting that you must feel like not having that complete control because you are relying on other people to do the job for you basically, right?
Yeah, and it's getting a bit tense. It's getting a bit fraught, isn't it? Even when Jim Love was like, "Look, we need this now." You know what I mean? And yeah, because you've got Matt and Lee's trying to do the re-entry procedure, and they work out obviously transfer power from the main console to the LEM to save those watts. It's you see the astronauts go through every range of emotion from jubilation to start with to trepidation when Jack's trying to dock. Obviously, then they start
Yeah.
the panic, then the infighting, and by then they're just tired and they just want to go home. And you've got, like you say, you got the guys on the ground trying to work out how to fit a square box into a round hole, which is a good
Which
use
is
of that
fantastic
phrase
as well.
finally. And yeah, and you get Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are hanging out with Blanche, Jim Lovell's mother, which is cool. And she's like, "Are you in the space program too?" I thought that was hilarious.
Could you imagine?
Yeah, because like, and the way they look at each other, like,
For the
"Hey."
space.
And I love Blanche. Like when Marilyn goes to see her with the kids, and she's like, she talked to the daughter. She's like, "Are you upset? Are you frightened?" And she's like, "Yep." She goes, "If they could make a washing machine fly, my Jim could fly." And I was like, "You're damn right, Blanche.
You
You
can land it.
That's it.
Yeah.
You can land it. It's like just you tell him, Blanche. But yeah, that whole re-entry thing is great. And even before that, when they've got to stop the CO2 leak, otherwise they'll all die of obviously carbon dioxide poisoning, and they make that like filter out of all the spare parts with like socks and bags and that. Great scene. And it go like even like Roger Ebert said, like this the stuff they use to get them home. Socks. They use somebody's socks
Yeah.
to get them home, and it's just like the ingenuity to be able to do that is off the scale, and it is a testament to everybody. Like Jim says at the end, I'm going to save his end speech for later, but he even says, it took thousands of people just to get us three home, and I think about that sometimes, and
Yeah.
it's great how they went into detail and made those scenes again tense. It's the whole film. One of the things I love about the film is the tension and the atmosphere they
Right.
build about this. How everything is a ticking time bomb, and as you said, when you're in space, it comes down to mathematics and science, but it also comes down to if one little thing goes wrong, which is what happened when it was what is it? One of the little a damaged coil inside the oxygen tank sparked. It happened once 2 years ago, minor thing in a practice. Turns out that one minor thing could potentially see you die in space. Space,
Right.
that craft could be your tomb if it
Yeah.
goes wrong. And how they bandied together in Houston in Florida and in the lunar module, the way that they did it in this film was great, I think. And a lot of my favourite moments are around those. So obviously the one you mentioned where they just want to get that re-entry procedure done and they're waiting, and the CO2 filter before, two pivotal moments. But I think they're done really well.
Absolutely. And I have some trivia to throw in here for a few of
Go
those
for
things
it.
you mentioned. So the CO2 thing did happen, and there is, you know what actually is really cool? They have video camera, so um, like we see in the movie how they filmed a little show for the
Hmm.
people that didn't see it. They had a video camera on them, so they actually like filmed a lot of their time up there. And they showed a video of them making this contraption that was built and given directions to. But the trivia behind that is that they had taken something like that into account in a similar situation, but a little bit different. So the cool thing about the space program is that this isn't like a fly by your seat kind of thing, right? This isn't like an organization where they just like don't take things into consideration. Everything is taken into consideration. Everything is practiced or done, or they come up with all kinds of problems. In the movie, you hear when Jack is when they first get him into the simulator and he's trying to park the command module with the lamb, how he's in program 67 or 64, and then after he doesn't get it, Jim's like, oh yeah, that we're in program 67. So these programs were these like written things that were like scenarios that get thrown at them. So they will throw in like issues right in the middle of something, and then the astronauts have to problem solve on how to fix this thing. And if they can't figure it out, then they get the other people to figure it out, because it could happen and you never know, right? So the
Yeah.
whole two thing was they had built the filter before, or they had to do something like that for, I think it was the Apollo 8. And they were like, do you remember when we did this or whatever? And the guys in mission control were like, oh, I kind of remember that. Okay, like we need you guys to do this again. So they
But different.
gave instructions on what to do, and then they put the filter together. But it was the square peg round hole thing, which, and the line that Ed Harris has was, I think it was, what was it? This must be a government operation or something like
Yeah.
that. It's just so funny because it's so true, right? And I can't remember which spacecraft was, but one of them for the filters they had a round scrubber, and the other one they had a square one, and then he's like, yeah, this must be a government operation. I thought that was hilarious. So that part of the story is 100% true. They did have to do that. You can see the actual thing that they built looks very similar to the one you see in the movie. And Blanche, who is Jim Lovell's mother in the movie, is played by Ron Howard's mom. His mom,
Yeah, I know. How sweet is his mum?
she's so sweet. So it is a Howard family affair in this
It's a
movie.
Howard
So
fest.
we see her. So Blanche is
All of
played
them.
by Jean Spiegel Howard. There is a priest in the movie that you see closer to the end at the Lovells house who sits next to Marilyn and is like comforting them and stuff. That is Ron Howard's father. His brother Clint Howard is also in the movie, and
Yeah.
he is the guy with the glasses and who with the thick rimmed black glasses who recommends closing the fuel tanks. That is
Clint
Ron
Howard.
Howard's father, and he makes kind of appearances in all of Ron Howard's movies. Not
Yeah, he does.
but a lot of them. And then his wife Cheryl is one of the onlookers at the launch, and yeah, so
Bryce
that's
is there
like how
too.
many. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 of his relatives are in this movie.
And Bryce Dallas is there as well. She's one of the kids at the launch.
Oh, is she?
Yeah, there
Okay,
ain't no party like a Howard party because they're all there.
okay, so they're there, and so yeah, there's some more trivia we'll get to the end, but so there's that, and then what else did I mention? I want to mention about the family, and I wanted to mention about the CO2 thing, and I think that's it for now. I still have more, but we'll get there. Yeah, so I thought that was so funny that his like basically his entire family is in this
Yeah, Ron, he's such a nice guy, isn't he? Get the Howard fam. Every time Ron has a film, I bet the rest of the family are like, right, let's not do anything this weekend because we may end up being in a Hollywood film again. But it is well written. It's a well written film, and like the technical aspects of it, working alongside NASA and astronauts to get the jargon correct, to some of the subtle humour in it, to things like Fred saying, "I could eat the arse out of a dead rhinoceros." Poetic, Fred. Well said. Do you know what I mean? And the way that Tom Hanks looks at him, because I heard that the line was not ad libbed necessarily, but it was he come up with the line himself. Excuse me.
No, it was actually, so Fred Hayes never said that, but the person who actually came and was Jake Busey.
That's it, Jake Busey.
He came to the set one day and he said, "Why don't you say this?" And they thought it was just like so funny, and so he just put it in the movie.
I'd love to know if Tom Hanks knew it was coming, because the way he looks at him, he's like, "What the fuck, hey?"
Yeah.
It's great. I noticed that yesterday because I'd heard that. I couldn't remember the story, but thank you for it. It's Jake Busey, and if you look at Tom Hanks' face today, even he's like, "Hey," it's such a well written film, and I've got so many things I love about the film, and I think I've mentioned almost all of them, apart from a few trivia bits. But was there, other than obviously like the finale, like everything that transpires to get them home, was there anything else before like the final act of the film we wanted to mention?
No, not that I can think of.
Well, should we talk about the end of Apollo 13 then? So pretty much from when they jettisoned the module, which was half missing, and then they found out that the heat shields are damaged. They're like, Jesus Christ, what else could go wrong? And then there's a typhoon which might get in the way. What did you think about like the ending then? Again, it's a real thing, but like a real incident event. But how did you think they handled all of that in the film?
I loved it because there's a lot of the technical stuff that is real that you don't know about spaceflight that they have to take into all this stuff into consideration. So we learn at the end of the movie that they're shallowing quite a bit because they were expected to have a couple 100 pounds of moon rocks, and so they had to transfer ballast from one part from the command module over from the lunar module into the command module, and it's just funny, like these are things, these like scientific things, like you can't, that they have accounted for, that you have, like, I don't know, that it can play a huge role in whether or not you make it back home or not, right? Ballast, freaking moon rocks. This is the kind of stuff, right? So I thought that was really interesting. And then the whole thing about the heat shield, and obviously, as we know, when you enter the Earth's atmosphere, you heat up. I don't know the science behind it. That's what happens anyway. And and so basically, it turns into like a fireball. So like when a meteor comes into the Earth, that's why you see them flying, and it looks like fireballs that are flying. That this is what happens when a ship re-enters the Earth, and it is always so wild to me. Like every time I see this or just think about it, I'm like, it's just so wild that even like that is how they have figured out space travel at the time, but even now it's the same thing, right? So like you get sent off into this rocket that goes
beat of metal there,
so fast. Like what was he say to his kid? Jim says, fast as a bullet from a gun. Like it's going so fast, and then they finally get out of the atmosphere and into space, and then basically they lose like 90% of the ship. Just floats out for whatever, and then they come home in this little capsule that turns into a fireball that comes into the atmosphere and lands in the ocean.
It's like a Russian doll, isn't it?
Has to come in a helicopter to come pick them up. It's totally wild. Like, it's absurd, really, when you think about it. But that's like the best way they could figure it out, how to do it.
And it works.
Because of the rules of space, and it works. But it's really, really risky.
Especially when it was made out of like tinfoil.
So you have these people in this like tinfoil can, and then they have to like come back into the atmosphere in a fireball. Then they land in the ocean. It's just so wild.
And I put roast chicken under tinfoil sometimes. So is that what happens? Is it similar to that?
it just disintegrates. So they have a heat shield it protects the astronauts from burning up, basically. And they were wondering if it was damaged in the thing, and then the other problem was they were worried the parachutes weren't going to open.
Yeah.
So there was all these. So they had just gone through this perilous, strenuous journey of getting around the moon and coming back, and they're like, you could see the Earth, they're right above it, and there's all these problems, and all they can do is just deal with it, right? All they could do is just hope for the best.
Fingers crossed and pray that they don't just
control these things, right?
Yeah.
So it's space travel, space exploration has come like a long way, but we still get put into space in rockets. And all these parts come off these millions and millions and millions of dollars to build these rockets these are just for the liftoff. Like they're not used for anything else.
It's
and then they leave, and then you still come back the same way. So we still actually haven't figured out a different way. This is the best way. Which is really, it's incredible to me.
It would have been really crap if upon re-entry they landed and smashed into the USS Iwo Jima. That would have been a bit of a crap ending, wouldn't it? But God damn it! No. After all that, we crash into the massive battleship. I agree. How the marvel of actually just getting this thing off the ground is outrageous, and then having to dock in space and the physics of slingshotting around the moon and just getting home and getting through the atmosphere of the Earth and knowing what the temperature is and how to build something that can withstand that is crazy. I mean, I've seen in the Natural History Museum in London some of the modules that they use for re-entry, and they are literally just they're very, very small. They are literally aluminium tin foil. Is mental. I love the scene before, and even before that, because I had to jettison the Aquarius. And there's a nice poignant moment when they do actually jettison that, and Jack's flying the ship. Jim Love was like, "Sorry, force of habit. You're in charge. You're piloting us home, Jack." And it's a lovely moment. And then they also watch the Aquarius drift into space, and they're saying goodbye to this ship that kept them alive, or to this lunar module capsule that saved them, even though it was falling apart. And it was
which we didn't mention that the lunar module is actually meant to stay on the moon.
Yeah,
that is not a vehicle that is meant to travel through space like they did with it.
No, you're right.
So they were doing something that was hadn't been done before, and it was a little risky. And the builders of this lunar module were worried that the engine wasn't going to work the way they wanted it, the way it needed to work for them.
Yep.
But it was a risk that they had to take because it was the only thing that they had, because they couldn't risk turning the engines on the thing that was damaged. So that was another thing. The fact that lunar module had got them basically almost all the way home before they let it go. It was really something.
Yeah. I agree. Poignant. And then obviously the re-entry is meant to take 3 minutes if the heat shield holds out. And the way that Ron Howard and they use shots of Marilyn and the family and everyone, and obviously Jim Lovell's son, who's at I think he's a military camp or something, but military university. But how that re-entry to take 3 minutes, and everyone's waiting for it. And on the news, they're like, no re-entry's ever taken longer than 3 minutes, and 3.5 minutes. 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes pass, and even though you know what happens as a true story, you're still thinking, oh, they didn't make it. After all that, they didn't make it. And of course, you get the kind of glorious, hello, Houston, this is Odyssey. Good to see you again. And everyone just goes mad and erupts, and the parachutes work, and everything that has gone before has somehow come together to transpire to get them home. And I think how they worked that scene was great.
It's really beautiful. I really find that scene really emotional.
Mm-hmm.
When
and the
everyone
score.
starts celebrating Mission Control. When you see Gene Kranz or Ed Harris, like he's kind of crying, and he's very emotional about it. That part really gets me, because after all of that hard work and all the stress and all the overnights and they got their job done, and yeah, it's such a huge feat. Um,
Well, because he says, I think this could be our finest hour, doesn't he? Because the guy's like, the president wasn't know what's going on. He's like, this could be a disaster.
he wants,
And he's like, no, I think this could be NASA's finest hour. Like, it's just a great line.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And then, so we see them celebrating, and then they shake hands. So we see them in the command module, and they shake hands,
Yeah.
and or the Odyssey, and then they say it's the Odyssey, we're signing off, and then we get to watch them coming out of being lifted into the helicopter, and then the scene where they are aboard the Iwo the USS Iwo Jima, and then there's Tom Hanks or Jim Lovell's like talking over. And then he's talking about what happened to all the astronauts after. So there is a cameo by Jim Lovell himself, who plays like the captain who shakes Jim's hand, and he's like, you can tell he's like saying something to him. We just don't get to hear it, but that is Jim Lovell.
That's awesome, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is awesome.
And then the last line there. Some days I like wonder when we will go back and who will that be.
That whole line is just the whole speech is just awesome. Like the way he's, I sometimes catch myself looking up at the moon, remembering the changes of fortune in our long voyage, thinking of the thousands of people who worked to bring the three of us home. I look up at the moon and wonder, when will we be going back and who will that be? And that line takes on some extra significance when you realise that since then there's been some pretty nasty disaster, like the Challenger shuttle disaster, of course, and the Columbia disaster in 17 years ago. So there's still been some horrific, horrible incidents, but in the moment with James Horner's score and the elation of everything that's just happened in their home, and it's a beautiful final line as well. And then obviously we find out what happened to everyone in real life, and that was a nice way to end off as well.
Yeah, 100%. It's lovely. Like you could see why someone would like this movie. It's just, these are real people that doing this incredible thing, and even though there's a couple mentions of Columbus in this movie, who I have my thoughts on. He says something like, they ask him at the beginning of the movie when he's doing that tour of the building. Yeah. Oh, and that's another thing I want to mention, that they call it a crawler. So when that spacecraft is on the crawler, they bring it from the building where they do the maintenance of it or they build it, and then they move it to the launch pad. That was like a real crawler.
Nice.
Like it was a thing that was there, and so that was super cool. Makes it even more legit that, and that's the other thing, like transferring this rocket on this like huge, it's just crazy to me. But anyways, Jim Lovell's doing this tour with the people, and someone asks him like, oh, we've already been to the moon, like why do we need to go back again? And he's like, imagine if Christopher Columbus went to the New World, but like no one came back in his footsteps or something like that, and it's so true. And that guy who asks him those questions is somebody special too. I can't remember who he was though.
I like the fact they just dotted these people in and out of the film, and I think what you just said there was also pertinent. Is that this? How can you not like this film? Almost there's so much to like about this film, not just the cast and the acting and the Hollywood story, but the real life story, the cameos, the authenticity, the love that went into this film. There's so much to like about this film, and we've even said it. So I'm not even going to bother with a part. There's nothing you didn't like about the film, or you thought nothing you didn't think was up to a certain standard. And there's nothing I could think of which I didn't like about the film. You know what I mean? I really enjoy pretty much every aspect. There's not one moment which I look at and think, yeah. I genuinely think all of it, for a 2 hour, 20 odd minute long film, is so very good. It's consistently really, really good. And I mean, there was a few facts and trivia. John Travolta was offered the role as Jim Lovell, but turned it down. This would have been after Pulp Fiction, but before Get Shorty. So kind of during Travolta's renaissance before we went into Pap films again. And Kevin Costner was
Yeah.
Jim Lovell's choice to play himself, but Kevin
Yeah.
Costner's stock had gone down.
Felt like
Yeah,
him.
he'd gone down somewhat by then. And there's a sweet scene at the beginning, a cool scene where Jim Lovell's at the lights, traffic lights in his car. Car pulls up next to him and he's like, "Yeah, you're Jim Lovell, man." And then the shot from behind of them pulling away and Jim Lovell stalls at the lights. I thought that scene was very American Graffiti, like Ron Howard paying
Right.
tribute to his own like film, the last film he acted in. But I thought it was his tribute to American Graffiti, and that's what I noticed every day. And I thought, do you know what? That was bloody awesome.
Yeah, no, that was really cool. Yeah, I remember that. He's like so excited. It's like, you're Jim Lovell, right?
Yeah, I mean, I get that all the time when I'm driving through Essex, but you know, it's fine. We deal with it.
And then after that happens, the light turns green, he goes, and then his car
Yeah,
stalls.
that's the second time that's happened. Yeah, great. So again, nice little scene which has nothing. There's no impact on the film, but it's fun. It's good. It's just levity and it's great. So was there any other scenes or moments that you wanted to touch upon before we move on?
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you said earlier about Marilyn Lovell not wanting to go to the launch, and that she said, because the kids have like busy schedules and stuff like that. But really, that was actually just about her, I think, not wanting to put herself through that. And she kind of mentions it, like how the other wives have not been to like 3 launches.
Yep.
It's really must be really tough watching your husband, leave the earth.
Yeah.
To go to space where like it's really risky.
You may never see him again.
And just having to like endure that, and she had already been to a bunch of different launches where he had gone, and it's stressful, right? And so she had that dream, and I think she was just like not feeling it. So you really feel for her. You have to kind of put yourself in her shoes of what that must be like for her as, someone who has to like watch everything happen, and, she has to take care of the kids and all that stuff. So I liked how Kathleen Quinlan portrayed Marilyn Lovell in that. I haven't really read of Marilyn. I haven't seen any complaints. I've seen some quotes from Marilyn Lovell, but she didn't say anything about how she didn't like the way she was portrayed or anything like that. So yeah, I was just thinking about that.
No, well, if the real life person, the real human hasn't got any issues, then I suppose you can just take that as a win. But I thought Kathleen Quinlan was very good with a task which, like you said earlier, could have been a thankless task, where a lot of the films she's just sitting in a room listening to a radio. So that could have been, had she not pulled it off well, it could have been a bit melodramatic. But I think she's great, and she fully deserved her Oscar nom, as did Ed Harris. I think Ed Harris was excellent in this film, and
he's so good.
Again, all the cast were great. I thought James Horner's score was excellent as well. So in terms of like the overall, and we mentioned cinematographer Dean Cunliffe, production design, costume design, everything here is excellent. I think Ron Howard did a very good job of directing a film. I think I can imagine it must be quite hard to direct a true life story, because people go in, or like Titanic, people go in knowing what's going to happen. So it's how you get to that point, and I think Ron Howard did a good job.
Yeah, and especially when the people, like when you're directing a story of where people that were involved are like still alive.
Yeah.
Also getting that authenticity of like the whole space program, like you said earlier, like the jargon and all that stuff, and just how it looked and how people acted and stuff like that. Like to get all of that accurate is super important for it to be believable to the rest of us.
Yeah.
But most importantly, like his thing was that astronauts watched this movie and felt like this was real. Like there was a couple comments I read about they particularly liked the launch. They really loved like the whole sequence of how it looks on the outside, because they're on the inside, the astronauts, right? They don't get to. They have the video of like the real, and they just thought that it was like super well done. And I think Jeff probably even mentioned like the space stuff really look like that they were really in space, because like that's apparently how it looks, and and the costumes help. Like I can't remember, I think I was watching Actors on Actors, or what is it called, Actors on Actors, where they have conversations with each other,
Something like that, yeah.
variety series or whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember which two actors I was watching, but they were talking about how costume design is super, super important for a lot of actors to do their job
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
properly. And if they're dressed for the part that they're playing, like they feel like they can do their job so much better. And I really felt like the accuracy of like how everyone was dressed and stuff during that time was probably helped everybody get to character so much better, and the fact that they built that replica of Mission Control, to make it looking just like it looked back then, to give that feel like you're actually there and actually doing something, is
Mm-hmm.
played a huge part in that movie coming to life, and making it as good as it was. So well done on his part, on all of their parts, and doing that.
From me and Laura, well done. Pat yourselves on the back. But you're spot on. Like in practical effects, CGI, having an actual set and having the weightlessness rather than harnesses, it adds to the performance, and you can tell the practical side of it really, really helps out, and everybody came together like they did in real life. It's not quite art imitating real life, because real life was a hell of a lot more tense, of course, but the way that they managed to convey that sense of panic, anxiety, but also like the steady and calm of Ed Harris when he finally breaks down at the end, Gene Kranz,
Yeah,
that it's finally off his shoulders. So how it was all put together was excellent. How everyone came together in that was fantastic, and I'm glad it got so many nominations at the Oscars. And I know the Oscars means different things to different people. However, it's validating to know that those in the know apparently put it forward for so many, including Best Picture. So yeah,
yeah.
got a lot of love from us and a lot of love from the audience. So well, that's me. That's everything I've got for the film. Do you have anything last comments on that?
No, I have said my
The
piece.
Queen of
Love the
Canada
film.
has spoken.
It will love it forever.
That's it. She has spoken. Well, we asked you guys on out there in the social verse, what did you guys think of Apollo 13? 88.5% of you gave it a thumbs up, and 11.5 gave it a thumbs down. And for people who didn't like the film, and I say this in every episode of Retrospectives, not to call people out or not to tell you you're wrong, or not to tell you that I'm a better fan than you for liking something. God forbid. But for those who didn't like this film, and why is that? We'd love to know why. What was it about it particularly you didn't like? Was it too melodramatic? Was it boring? Be interested to know what you guys thought. But a couple of comments. A space bloggersy. What a great name. She said this is a movie I could watch over and over again. My buddies over at Superhero Pole Plus, double thumbs up, excellent. Jacob Flaz says, were a fan? I still am a fan. And the excellently titled Clone Wars Season 7 said, I love it. And finally, the Northern Hunk, the beefcake, Ant Shot First, good buddy, said, mate, one of my top 10 of all time. Watched it twice in a day a couple of weeks ago. It's an incredible, feel-good film. So a lot of people seem to be on the same wavelength as you and I, Laura. So just on those comments, that must be good to hear.
That's awesome. No, I, I don't want to say that I've been embarrassed that this is always my favorite movie, but it just doesn't, usually in groups of friends or whatever. It's just that this isn't a movie that ever like comes up
Mm-hmm.
to people's minds when we talk about movies and stuff. So when I say, oh, I like Paul 13, they're like, oh, and they don't say anything bad. I think it's just like not something that they consider to be in like their top anything, right? So
Yeah.
it's just always been there for me, and it's never come off my list. Like it'll never come off my list. Like it'll always be there. So yeah, and that's fine. I don't mind. We all have different opinions. I can understand why some people might not be interested in space. They might not be interested in like American feel good stories. They might
Yeah.
think that some of this movie is boring because there's some like slower parts to it, etc. So like I totally understand like why some people might not like the movie, and that's it's subjective, and that's totally fine. But I love it. So I'm open to conversations anytime.
And Laura can talk a good talk, and she thinks it's bloody good. So change her mind, if you will. No, yeah, I agree. Excellent film. 96% Rotten Tomatoes. Very, very respectable 77 on Metacritic. So it seems like the majority of people do enjoy this film. So with that kind of wraps up this episode of the Back Row Retrospectives and our Apollo 13 episode. So Laura, the voice of movie astrology, the tones you hear on the historical movie show we do. Thank you so much for coming on and giving your time to talk some Apollo 13.
Thank you, Matt, so much for having me, as usual. I'm always bewildered that Matt keeps inviting me back to his show. I really appreciate it very much. It's always a good time.
No, always happy to have you back on, my friend. If the world has just heard you and wants to follow you anywhere on an island, they don't, you should. Whereabouts can they find you online?
You could find me on my lowly the Twitter account, which is wannabeme11. That's WANNABEEEME11 on Twitter. And that's it. That's the only place that I allow.
Yeah, that's all you can find out. Yeah, let's go on there for some smouldering hot takes and some Star Wars stalking as well. For me, what I watched tonight.co.uk, what I watched tonight, Twitter and Instagram. We're on Facebook as well. We don't release it too much, but we're on there. Rotten Tomatoes. If you like what you've just heard, please do let your buddies know that there's a movie show out there which just talks about bloody good films, basically. And if you really like it and you've got a spare 30 seconds, do consider leaving us a good review on your podcast provider of choice. And if you don't like the show, keep it to yourself. Just do that for me. But yeah, and again, thank you once again, Laura. Hope everyone's enjoyed listening to the insight that Laura's given for Apollo 13. Do go follow her and check her out, or just talk to her about film because she knows her stuff. From me, though, guys, thank you so much for listening. See ya.